Welcome to Daytime Ottawa here on Rogers TV. I'm just going to start off, first of all, by thanking all of our wonderful volunteers. For those of you that don't realize it, we're a volunteer-driven television station here at Rogers TV. All the programming you see here on Rogers TV is because of our volunteers, and they come in and support us each and every day. And, you know, we have a great crew in here today. Only one person missing due to the storm, so a big thanks to our volunteers, and a big thanks to all of our guests who made it in as well. So we have all of our guests coming in live in person. Really excited about that, except for our first guest. He is joining us virtually here today. I'm joined by Dr. Jahu. He is a public health physician, among other things. Welcome to the show, Dr. Hu. Great to have you here. And this is a really interesting winter season. You know, when it comes to cold and flu, we obviously have been talking about COVID for the past couple of years, but we bring in RSV into this season as well this year. Dr. Hu, tell us a little bit about how difficult this season has been so far, and sort of projecting moving forward. What do you see as far as our season goes?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly been quite a brutal season. I hope we are past the worst of it with the last 2 years of COVID. But, you know, as you mentioned, last year, the year before, we didn't see a whole lot of any respiratory viruses, including flu or RSV. Normally every year these two circulate amongst a bunch of other things that cause people to be sick. But, you know, what we're seeing this year is quite an early and high surge in cases of RSV, followed by a very, very early and very high peaking flu season, which, you know, together is really causing a lot of chaos, particularly amongst the, you know, young children sort of in our country. And so, yeah, it's been tough.
And RSV isn't new to us. It just seems to be spreading more this year. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, RSV sort of always been around. And, you know, if I go back to 2019 or 2018, it's always kind of been a leading cause of hospitalization, young kids, and also actually older adults as well. I'm not really sure why it got so much media attention this year, but I'm sort of glad that people are aware. I do think we're seeing a particularly bad season with this tripledemic of RSV, flu, and COVID. But certainly these things have been around for quite a bit longer than COVID has been.
And putting obviously a big strain on our healthcare system. I know that you've used CHEO as an example, but that's not the only example of many of our hospitals being overwhelmed, right?
Absolutely. I mean, pediatric hospitals across Ontario, across Canada, sort of really are being overwhelmed right now. A lot of what we were seeing with adults during COVID, for example, cancellation of surgeries, transferring patients around, we're seeing that happening across, in Ottawa, Toronto, across the country. Primarily because of sort of this double whammy with RSV and flu, and there's baseline COVID sort of floating in the background as well.
How do we best protect ourselves and others during this difficult time, with this tripledemic, as you called it?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the most important and easiest thing for people to do is to get vaccinated. Uptake of both COVID bivalent boosters, pediatric COVID vaccine, flu vaccine is super low, particularly in younger populations. And so I think that's sort of the number one thing that I think people should do. Other stuff that's really important, if you are sick, don't go to that Christmas party as much as you want to.
Right.
I think the people around you will thank you. I think there is a role for masking in certain, indoor settings, particularly if they're crowded. But I would say vaccination is the most important thing. And, uptake rates of these vaccines are pretty dismal across the country, even though we're going through this tripledemic.
And perhaps that's because of some of the as you call it, misconceptions and mistruths, if you will. Let's go over some of those, because we have heard, when it comes to COVID and the flu, that you can get your boosters, but some people say, maybe that's going to be too hard on my body. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with both flu and COVID, there are some side effects. They tend to only last a day or two. Probably a lot of people listening to this got at least one COVID shot or two probably in the past, couple of years. And actually, a lot of the side effects after the booster are lower than after, say, your first dose or your second dose. Either way, I think the side effects of these vaccines are considerably lower than, what it feels like if you get COVID or you get influenza, both of which can really, knock you on your feet. Yeah.
What about, there's also the argument that some people make and saying, this COVID booster, for instance, isn't good for the current variants that are going around. I guess because they've heard that a lot about the flu over the years as well, right? If you get the flu shot, well, there's different strains of the flu, and it'll protect you, but not completely. Maybe you can explain that for us a little bit as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think one of the differences is, when we had our first go around with COVID vaccines, they're really, really, really good at protecting you against getting COVID, period. But now the vaccines aren't as good for that, but they're still really good at preventing against sort of severe infection like hospitalization or going to the emergency department. And right now, I think you really, try to avoid emergency departments if possible, given the wait times. And I think that's just a really important thing to note, right? Like, if you do get COVID or flu after you're vaccinated, whatever illness you get will be a lot more attenuated, much, much less severe than if you didn't get those vaccines. I think another thing really is that a lot of people sort of like get sick after they get their vaccine and they're like, it didn't work. But there's literally, 1,000 different types of, maybe not 1,000, like dozens of different viruses that can cause cold-like symptoms. But I mean, none of those things generally land you in hospital. And so I think, the COVID, the flu, and soon there'll be some RSV vaccines too, really protect you against severe outcomes of these three infections, which actually cause severe things like emergency department visit, hospitalization, even death.
You mentioned cold there. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, COVID's no worse than a cold. If you get it and you're not vaccinated, you can just ride it out. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people have a pretty benign course with COVID. I mean, that being said, most of the people who have a pretty benign course have been vaccinated previously. But, there's still thousands of people in Canada hospitalized with COVID, but tens of thousands probably actually. And so it's not like the common cold, right? Like nobody ever went to hospital for the common cold. And I know that a lot of people have had COVID and, they think it's sort of less big of a deal. But I mean, it's, if you're really young, if you're really old, you're immunocompromised, really for everybody, it can still cause pretty bad infection. A buddy of mine just got COVID for the second time and he was like knocked out sick for like a week and it was really rough. And so it definitely still protects you against sort of the really, really bad outcomes because nobody wants to be in hospital on Christmas.
Yeah, of course. Well, I went through that last year, actually. I got COVID on December the 22nd and unfortunately our Christmas celebrations got canceled. So I'm trying to be as careful as possible. This certainly this time around, my family has warned me to be very careful when I'm, going out, especially in, as you said, those crowded places and things like grocery stores and things like that. For people to get access to cold and flu vaccines, where's the best place to go?
Oh, pharmacies, I think, really, really accessible there for most. And so, I think we have an abundance of vaccines sort of floating around. Pharmacies are really convenient. Public health still does, offer some vaccines, I think. And so depending on where you are, I say for most pharmacies is the easiest place to go. And there are no lineups, that's for sure. So
yeah, I know now you can literally just walk in. You don't even need to make an appointment in various. But I always suggest certainly people call ahead just in case. Dr. Hu, really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right, happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you and your family. Don't go away. Speaking of Christmas and the holidays, Rob Statham, the Drunken Grape, back with some great wine and beer pairing ideas right after this.